after several years of trauma, I've lost my sense of self. I'm feeling stuck, disconnected from who I am, what I want, and unsure on how to move forward. I'd really like help on how do I rebuild my health and sense of self after years of trauma and self-sabotage.
Self-sabotage really is an unconscious agenda, but it is human nature that we're looking for threats. We associate what was painful, whether it's the full picture or not, and then we develop self-sabotaging behaviours in the short term reactively to protect us from a perceived threatening environment.
Self-sabotage is that you know what you want, but there's something that keeps nipping at your heels.
Yeah, is actually offering us something beneficial or that we perceive as beneficial in the short term from a protective or comfort level that actually conflicts with what we would value or what we'd love to manifest in a longer term. Greg, how are you?
I'm good, mate. Yeah, we've just come back from a bunch of time caravanning, 3 months around the South Island, family of 5, 3 kids under 7. It's been great and challenging. But
so how are you really?
Yeah, surviving. To be honest, we came back, so you know, different space every couple of days, different vista. We like tramping and outdoors and biking, all that sort of stuff. It feels like you're spinning in a snow globe while you're traveling. Came back home, thought, okay, we'll be great. This is so expansive being home instead of a 8.5 meter caravan. But then the world stops. You know, you're in one home, you're living in a box, beautiful box, grateful for it, but found myself feeling very trapped. And so the last couple of weeks has been like, okay, what's the novelty? What's the different stuff I need? I've been catching up in person with someone pretty much every day.
You said that,
yeah. To keep things different from just working from home. But yeah,
sorry, can I ask? Tell me, because this is a bit of a preamble, but a great sort of case study for the listeners. Obviously a big part of the work that we talk about is aligned action and values and what do you really want. I think obviously you could say you have more clarity than most in terms of what's important to you. We've done some values work individually, but relative to your values and the freedom and your business, etc., what did you learn or take away from that, whether it's you want more of, less of, or to be more intentional with? Because, my impression is all of this, maybe it was an experiment, but it was also somewhat of an aligned experiment where you did believe it supported your values. So where to from here?
Yeah, totally. So the core values, and they have a bit more than this, but essentially love, freedom, adventure. Living from love, freedom to serve, adventure. In my context, that's also adventure with God and purpose. And so the freedom, love, freedom, adventure is all wrapped up with the travel as well. So that was awesome. A lesson going like us in the family unit, us being all good as a unit and enjoying adventure and interacting with the world. That felt very much like we can make decisions, we can have autonomy, and that felt awesome. The amount of freedom was great. So that really ticked that box in terms of can we do it? Can we be in a small space? Can we navigate all our buttons getting pushed, in marriage and with parenting with the kids, and you're going, can we handle that in a pressure cooker environment? So, we loved testing that and going, yes, we can. Coming back, I think the part that I realized was family's not enough. And what I mean in a good way, like I love family, but at the same time, I need a mission, I need a purpose, I need to be doing more than that. So the idea of just enjoying ourselves as a primary, that wasn't the primary thing of traveling, but it's not enough for fulfillment. So I think coming back and going, okay, what does the next couple of months, couple of years look like beyond having experiences that we enjoy?
Well, that's even a potentially relatable example. Oftentimes, whether it's the listeners can relate to this, or oftentimes, a lot of clients I work with might be a business person and they love what their business offers them, and that's very fulfilling. But perhaps sometimes they can be all in on that value at the cost of some others.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're not, overcorrecting necessarily, although that is common. It could just be that they're really clear and congruent in one area, and that's a fantastic thing or a fulfilling thing. But there's not that same balance towards the other values or purpose priorities.
Yeah. I think it's recognizing that I think for my wife, Laura, family being a top priority, there's a lot of things that are aligned there. And I think I have some other priorities that family gets included into, but it's not a primary, it's not the number one. So it's like they get included in what we are doing and the mission that we're on. And that's part of how family, in my mind, where that sits, where I think relationally and as a focus for my wife, family can be number one. And that feels right, where I'm going, no, there's something missing. So being aligned on all that stuff. But yeah, that's
Love
how
it.
I'm doing.
Love it.
How about you?
Yeah, mate, I am good, thank you. I had to actually write down a couple of notes, like, Greg's going to say, how are you, what have you been up to? Because I feel like half the time, I'm for better or worse, taking on so much, and we're going, great, what is the content, getting the questions ready. But things are well, thank you. That said, a lot of moving parts, like always. So I just had two kids, two out of three of my children just had birthdays in the last week. So Ruby just turned 1, and Boston just turned 3, and then we've had their respective birthday parties as well. So you know what that's like, obviously. But so children's birthday parties, we're moving into, I think I said a couple of episodes back, we've secured sort of the dream home or the next step in that regard, which is really inspiring. So we move houses in 2 weeks. So that's excellent. And I've also just got back from Auckland doing a couple of other shows, which is rewarding, but also, we talk about purposeful actions and steps, a really meaningful step for me because obviously, we've taken on the show, but probably historically I've just sort of kept to myself. I love the client work, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of challenge myself, not only with working on speaking, but with traveling and getting on other shows.
Yeah, awesome.
Really rewarding. Yeah, and really great people as well.
Cool.
All right, Jamie, today's question, please. Who have we got?
Okay, today's question is submitted from Nicki, and Nicki asks, how do I stop fear of abandonment from controlling my life?
Well, big question. Fear of abandonment. I imagine there'll be a lot that listeners will be able to get out of this, and whether they call it abandonment or not, fear of being left, fear of not being liked, fear of not whatever.
Betrayed.
Lots of those different things that are relational, fear of something happening relationally like that. That's not what we want from controlling our life. There's a bunch for me that probably shows up as people pleasing, and a lot that control our life when we have a fear of something relationally not happening. All the things that we do that then becomes the primary master or control of how we interact. So. Yeah, big question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing, obviously we'll hear more from the question in a moment, but I think one of the most common things I see, and I know we touched on this with Indy's episode a while back as well, is often, in fact, not Indy, sorry, with Andy's episode last week about the imposter syndrome in the work sense. But I think oftentimes, just the inauthenticity or inauthentic behaviors. We've spoke about how we show up, right? That almost the sales rep or the persona, almost that incongruent version of ourself, half the time not even knowing our real self or who we are, our values, because it's, again, who do I need to be for others so they don't leave me, or so I'm not rejected, etc. So, I mean, we'll obviously hear with the question. I am mindful that, abandonment ultimately is a label, like many things, and it can also be the story we tell ourselves or the meaning we make out of it as a core idea in the show and in my work. But yes, whether it's emotional neglect, betrayal, maybe someone hasn't experienced this yet, but, let's be honest, right? Relationships are a huge part in life. At any point, there could be a breakdown where you perceive or, associate that you've been rejected or left or maybe fired from a job and disregarded. So whether it's something you can relate to or you have a bit of a wound with that's affecting your behaviours, or whether it's something just to be more self-aware of to navigate moving forward, I think I love this question. So well done, Jamie, with that. Jamie, hit us with Nicki's audio, please.
Hi Hayden, my name's Nicki, and I'd really like help on how do I rebuild my health and sense of self after years of trauma and self-sabotage. The main thing I'm really struggling with is that after several years of trauma, I've lost my sense of self. I'm feeling stuck, disconnected from who I am, what I want, and unsure on how to move forward. Over the past few years, there's been several big things that have really affected me. COVID was traumatic and it brought a lot of stress and uncertainty. Then in 2023, I went through a deeply painful affair. And last year, my dad died. So looking back on it, I can see it's just built up over time and affected me more than I realised. The biggest place I feel it now is in my health. Back in 2018, I was in a really good place, but since then I've slipped back into bad habits. And what's really important to me now is getting my health back on track, losing weight and getting fitter so I can feel good in myself again. But I keep falling into this pattern where I get in my own way. I want to feel better and healthier and I want to move forward, but I just keep sabotaging myself. I'm overthinking things, I'm comparing myself to others, eating emotionally, and struggling with knowing what I really want and how to actually follow through on it. And it's not just showing up in my health either. I want to grow my business, but I feel stuck at the level it's at and I just can't understand why. And in my personal life, I really want to protect and keep building the relationship I've built with my husband. Through counselling, I realised I have a fear of abandonment. And I think a lot of that goes back to my dad leaving when I was a teenager. I think that shaped a lot more of my behaviour than I understood before. It's affecting almost every part of my life, really. A lot of the time I feel like I'm just getting through life rather than really living it. And when I feel overwhelmed, I procrastinate, which just makes me feel worse about myself. I need to change this because I can see what it's costing me. If nothing changes, I worry I'll stay stuck and never really step into the life I want. And I don't want trauma and fear to keep shaping my decisions or holding me back. So I'd feel so much happier in myself. I'd be healthier, I'd have more energy, I'd be more confident, I'd have more trust in myself. And I'd show up better in my business and in my marriage. And a really important thing is I'd be able to keep up with my grandchildren and really enjoy that part of my life. Thanks, Hayden. I'm really looking forward to your advice.
Mm. Well, thank you, Nicki, for sharing that. Greg, I think where we start, what there's a lot there, right? In terms of, I noticed that, she, obviously we look at, what do you want? Why are you stuck? How do we get there? One of the repeating themes I believe I heard there was even just this sort of lack of clarity and, what does Nicki want, right? Which, clearly goes hand in hand with that identity loss. And I think the wisest place to start from my perspective would be recognizing the relationship between trauma and self-sabotage, okay? And whether that's, abandonment specific trauma or any trauma, there's going to be a significant link there. So self-sabotage is an interesting one. I don't believe we've done too much of a deep dive on it yet, but it's very, very relevant in many ways. And so self-sabotage really is an unconscious agenda that you could say we're not aware of, right? Hence the unconscious piece. And so, for example, we could say, that I would love to empower, my health or lose this weight, but there could be this fear that we lose this weight and, we're still not enough for someone else, or maybe we perceive that it's not going to work on some level, or we've got a fear of failing. It could be a very common one. And so in one regard, perhaps it could be we think we want, or maybe sincerely want, aligned with our values, to take action in the area of our health. But then there's this unconscious fear of, what if I fail? What if I lose this weight and I'm still rejected? And so self-sabotage, I use that word self-sabotage on my website, interestingly, because it resonates with people. And I feel that generally speaking, no one really deals with it well. But the truth is, it's an unconscious motive and you're getting benefits out of it, frankly, which sounds, perhaps quite surprising, quite un-PC. But the difference is, mate, is they are short-sighted benefits, not long-term values-aligned benefits. So, for example, the short-sighted benefit of self-sabotaging is I don't get it wrong, or I don't risk failure, or if I'm overthinking, then I'm able to escape and not make the wrong decision, etc. So the self-sabotage is actually offering us something beneficial, or that we perceive as beneficial in the short term from a protective or comfort level, that actually conflicts with what we would value or what we'd love to manifest in a longer term. So trauma or abandonment, and then the self-sabotage, we can look into more specific ways that things I see with how certain, probably perhaps certain or most frequent self-sabotage or attachment styles in relationships and how that can have negative outcomes. But ultimately, trauma and self-sabotage, I would almost say 1-to-1 ratio, frankly.
Yeah, right. So just make sure I understand, and also for the listeners, when you're saying the self-sabotage, I'm sure it'd be really common for the listeners, whether that's personal life or business, as she's sharing as well. Are you saying, for example, say if I did really try, if I followed through, and maybe in her example, I lost the weight, got fit, and then there was some kind of pain, maybe some kind of not being accepted or rejected, that could be perceived maybe unconsciously as more painful, like let's avoid that. Or maybe in my context would be, if I really tried at business and I really set a big goal that I really wanted to achieve and it didn't work, gosh, that would be painful. Or if I really was myself and put myself out there and then people didn't like me, gosh, that would be painful. So you do some other activity, even though you don't like it, that is a lesser pain, but cut short the bigger pain of, it's like if you don't try in exams. Well, you can't say I'm not smart because I never really tried anyway.
That is the perfect example.
Yeah, it's like I got a B or I got a C or I didn't pass or whatever, but if I really tried.
Yeah. And I think
you always leave it as a potential thing because you never actually want to get the.
Absolutely. If you never went all in, then it's almost, what do they say? Sort of the devil, I think I heard someone say the other day, which I thought, I'll use that. I think they said, it's almost an unfamiliar hell versus a familiar hell versus an unfamiliar heaven sort of thing, right? So just
and even though you would consciously, as you're saying, even though you'd consciously say, I do not want this. There is
see what it's costing me.
Yeah, there is a part of you that does want it, or it's serving you in your language. It would serve you in the short term. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that short term distinction is what I've found over the years resonates most with clients, especially because they will go, well, Hayden, what are you talking about? It's not serving me. Nicki would probably say, well, I'm on this call because maybe parts of my behaviours perhaps have. Maybe some of her behaviours have played a role in the affair and some of these challenges or other relationships dynamics. We all, it's a two-way street, right? It's a dynamic there. But yeah, when you think about it on the short term, you can go, okay, well, perhaps it's not offering me the benefits in the longer term relative to my values, if one even knows what they are. But in the short term, again, I don't have to step out. I don't have to be vulnerable. I don't have to take those risks. So I think that's the first part. It's offering us an unconscious benefit. Okay. And I think the next level to that would be, being even more specific, is that the self-sabotage, yes, is offering us an unconscious benefit, but it's offering us a benefit relative to past or perceived pain, right? So interestingly, Nicki said right at the end, which I actually thought was the most revealing, frankly, right at the end, she said, look, yes, there's these behaviours and this self-sabotage, and it sounds like she said, at one point I had counselling and built a bit of awareness to perhaps actually, my father leaving at a young age, perhaps actually there's some abandonment trauma there. And look, if I was a betting man, I would be all in on that theory personally. I have never worked with a client who has been through an event like that or similar events that hasn't got some sort of parent wound. And interestingly, mate, I say that not even from the perspective of dwelling on that or playing the victim. I mean, hopefully it's obvious that my belief and a core idea of the show is being resourceful with your perceptions and how you see things and challenging those narratives, rewiring the brain so you're not caught up in these pain avoidance loops. But it is human nature that we we're looking for threats. We associate what was painful, whether it's the full picture or not, and then we develop self-sabotaging behaviours in the short term reactively to protect us from a perceived threatening environment. So I'm interested, anything comes to mind for you, but I'll leave it there just with saying that past event of her father leaving and the way that she interpreted that event will absolutely be a big piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like you're saying, without judgment is basically we are wired for relationship, particularly when we're younger. As they're the big people in our worlds, the people that we are connected to.
And sorry to interrupt, Greg, but I mean primary relationship with
totally.
The feminine or the masculine.
Yeah, you got these relationships, and we're story creating beings, and so when things happen, creating meaning or sense out of them, we tell ourselves a story. I think everyone will have either subconscious big events that have happened, and then you tell yourself a story about what that means, and you form a belief out of that. I know that I've done that with key moments. If you look back through your past, there's sometimes things that, of all the things that happen in your life, there's key moments that stand out as lighthouse moments or key, and they can be small moments too. Just a teacher saying something or an offhanded comment or something big, but for some reason it lands with you in a way that, positive or negative, you make a story and a big meaning out of. So
can I also
resonate with
just
that.
Quickly say that the, every now and then, if perhaps there's a lot going on for a particular client I might be working with, and maybe I think, where do we need to start with actually looking at where these associations stand out? Oftentimes, if it's not immediately obvious to me, when we're looking at these memories, it'll just be what stands out to you, right? What are those memories? And, they might say, look, I couldn't even tell you, Hayden, what it was, but I was in my room playing and my dad came in and said, why haven't you done this? And they might say, look, it wasn't even per se this significant trauma or this big deal. Oftentimes people struggle with it because they don't want to dwell on it or play the victim to me. And I appreciate that. But at the same time, there's a reason you're remembering it, okay? We talk a lot about pain or pleasure, the highs or the lows, the seek or avoid. And, the brain is very much incentivized. And in fact, the purpose of memory, many would say, is to protect us from threats. And so first and foremost, you'll generally retain or have those vivid memories of those pain points, right? Or perhaps, again, it doesn't have to be a disproportionate pain, but it might be something that you perceive you didn't see coming, or there was a bit of a perception that you maybe didn't quite understand where that came from, etc. But also it can be, we might remember a family holiday and we've associated, where we've got a cognitive bias where we're only remembering all the great parts of the family holiday and not the challenges. And so regardless of if these memories are the full picture, which they very rarely are, we tend to remember both what we want to avoid and what we want to seek. And again, that's human nature. But the degree that those highs and lows, perceived highs and lows, are polarized, black and white, is the degree that we get caught up in behaviours or self-sabotage, whether we call it trauma or not, to avoid being in that situation again. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Just to clarify too, so if a listener's saying, okay, if I want to get to the root of maybe some earlier things that have happened in my life, some stories that I've told myself, beliefs that I've picked up that are fundamental and maybe even subconscious that are driving my current behaviors, both good or maybe negative, do they need to identify the exact memory? Or are you saying as long as you have conscious memories that you are able to associate with what you wanted and what you wanted to avoid, that's enough to work with? Or can someone even go, I don't really remember, but here's the current patterns. Is that enough to go, like some people go, I don't really remember my childhood, but I'm operating like this now. Do you just start there and move forward? Or is it really important that you go, no, we need to find some earlier memories?
So there's kind of two ways to answer this, right? Because there's almost like what I'm aiming for when I'm working with clients as sort of like a best case scenario, once and for all, we're going to clear this, versus what you could say, giving the listeners a place they can start and maybe what's practical or realistic without, seeing a specialist or another therapist perhaps. I think, the first thing I'll just very quickly say with respect to the memories is, oftentimes part of the protection or survival response can be, I'm going to suppress these memories to move on with things. And so I'll layer that with saying, in an ideal world, certainly what I'm looking for is I am interested in identifying the precise moments that are the best quintessential examples of where these associations were created.
They create as much as possible a black and white moment where you said it, this is good, this is bad, or this is what I will do, this is what I will avoid.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because the truth is there will be probably hundreds of moments, because usually from those what I call early life or root cause moments, because then what happens is we tend to be sensitive to those pain points. So then we're looking for more of them, so we compound and associate more along the way. So what I say with my clients is, look, at the end of the day, working on memories, understanding their relevance and the meaning of them, all of that is going to be incredibly relevant for the listeners. Again, I think any connections they can make of how their past experienced pain points, and we'll get into this shortly, the narratives and the stories they've made out of that, how that corresponds with their self-sabotage and their trauma affecting their health, like Nicki said, or sense of self. We'll get to that in a moment. But looking at those correlations on any level is crucial. Again, I challenge myself and my clients to go, what are the earlier life moments? But I think any moments are relevant.
Like earlier and most vivid.
Yes, correct. But doing the weave all the way back, I also was trying to say, that as an individual recognizes that perhaps there might be purpose to unpacking or building self-awareness in terms of how their early life experiences may actually be influencing, shaping, informing their behavior now, they will actually they can start to associate a different purpose with accessing these memories. So, the amount of clients that I've had that will tell me, Hayden, I don't remember that. I don't want to talk about it. And then if I, let's say a session or two, we've built some rapport, and I will just tell them point blank, look, I can help you either way, but we can really do this in so much more of a meaningful and thorough way if we can get to those memories. And as they actually start to go, you know what, I would love that. I can see the value of that.
A bit of safety created.
Those memories start to come up, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that because I guess I'm also challenging the listeners perhaps. Yes, look, I'm always looking at the reframing and how can we rewire neuroplastically those narratives in general, but just having the awareness of what were the most impactful events before any type of narrative work or challenging those stories, finding meaning in it is crucial.
Yeah.
So a bit of a spiel there, but hopefully that answers your question. Now I think that the next part, I made a note here, so we have trauma, driving the self-sabotage. And I think just to make this really practical from the abandonment sense, or even for Nicki, I don't work directly with attachment styles with my clients because in one regard, I find that it is just a label, and like many things, getting caught up in that label isn't always productive. However, there is a lot of benefits to recognizing what is your attachment style, right?
And what do you mean by attachment style?
So for example, if you have this pain, and thus, if you have a disproportionate pain, you are going to have a fear, right? You can't have a fear without a pain. So if she has a fear of being left, clearly that corresponds to this associated pain or judgment on either herself or her father with her father leaving. Then there is going to be an adoption of certain behaviors or coping strategies in life, but particularly in relationships, to avoid that pain. So, some people might label that an anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, etc. So, anxious attachment, for example, could be, if we have a fight or an argument or there's some conflict, whether it's big or small, then I get anxious, I'm a bit of a mess, and maybe I'm sort of looking for that reassurance. Maybe I'm codependent, being a little bit overbearing, whatever that can be. It's so individual. The flip side could be if I'm an avoidant, labeled or meet the sort of avoidant attached as part of that trauma response. It could be that we have an argument and, it's like now I become distant and I'm avoiding. And then, of course, that can create its own challenges because then if there's a relevant conflict or an argument in the marriage, what marriage doesn't have arguments, then instead of being resourceful with how you connect, it can be punishing the other person or avoiding.
And those both being some sort of coping mechanism to try and get your perceived needs met. That if I'm like anxiously attached, if that has it plays out as I try and seek more connection from you and I don't feel like I have that connection, I'm seeking. It comes across often as neediness. I would be that in our relationship, going anxiously attached, my wife more avoidant. And so we play that game unintentionally where I'm seeking connection and she's going, moving away from. But you're both trying to get your needs met, right? It's right. And I think that from what I understand, the healthy version is secure attachment, which is I'm good with me. We could say, I love me.
We could have an argument.
I choose to interact with you. I choose to love you, as opposed to I'm not okay. I need this from you. It's
quite reassurance.
Quite a different place. And if you've got two secure people, great healthy dynamic, but normally there's something going on, high percentage.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'd have to even have a bit more of a think about it. You see, to get their needs met. I would probably almost say it's more even fundamental than that, or maybe not necessarily. I would just say again, it's simply to avoid pain,
right?
Because if you're an avoidant attached, or sort of meet that label, so to speak. I mean, perhaps in some scenarios, you're avoiding and you're hoping they will come to you, and maybe there's this sort of testing aspect of it, right? So I'm not saying it's not a way to try and get your needs met, but again, first and foremost, it's a short-sighted way of avoiding the pain. And so to relate all this back to Nicki, because like I said, I don't like to get too caught up in the labels there, but I do recognize, a lot of people get a lot of value of going, that's my attachment style, because simply, again, as we say, being aware of all of this can take you so very far. So I think, it would be wise for Nicki to recognize how this pain, this trauma is driving her self-sabotage, I mean, again, we haven't even got into the self-sabotage and the health and the emotional eating and all those things she said, so we'll see how we go with that. That might have to be a separate episode. But I would love for her to reflect on how is her fear or fears of being left, abandoned, etc., someone not being there for her ultimately, how is that driving her protective responses, her behaviors in the marriage, right? And so again, is it codependency? Is it trying to constantly, appease, the husband? Is it, I mean, she mentioned one of the goals was to rebuild her sense of self and the health being part of that. And so as we talk about it, it's like, well, what do you want? What do you value? I think we've all had friends or relationships where, they're so quick to agree with you or take on your opinion. And oftentimes there's sort of this, we can almost sniff out that inauthenticity, or maybe it can be harder to respect them, which is such a challenging thing for people in Nicki's position, because clearly deep down what she values so much is that connection, but the way in which you're going about it is the short-sighted, inauthentic way to avoid that. And then frankly, I would suggest it is those behaviors over time, whether it's, you're controlling his behavior, you're reading the text messages because of your own insecurities from being left that you're carrying, all of those behaviors then showing up in the marriage, which then creates, the trauma itself actually recreates that same pain in the present day.
And I know this is something you're suggesting that Nicki does. She goes to that and has a look at what are her behaviors that maybe she's exhibiting as a result of that, or, what's the story that she picked up with maybe her dad leaving, or as she said, abandonment, and the belief that she now has around maybe herself or others. Just like personally for me, I think one of the ways that shows up for me is if I have I can't think of an exact example where I'd say I was rejected and then I was accepted by being someone different, but people pleasing has been a coping mechanism for me for many, many years. I think a lot of people do it. And essentially it's asking the question going, look, if I'm not okay as who I am, if for Nicki, if she goes, hey, who I was left, as in, I was abandoned or felt abandoned, then if that didn't work, who do I need to be that will be accepted? And then you can get into this, okay, who do I need to be in this environment, people pleasing, all of that. I think that sense of self can be lost either, really quickly, or for me over many, many years, where you consistently ask in different environments, who do I need to be accepted by you? And then at a certain point you go, well, what do I want? What do I want for my business? What I want from my marriage? Who am I? And in the absence of roles, you come up with nothing. And I've been there where it's really disorientating, where you remove your roles and remove some of your indicating markers that you've built in your life. And without them, you go, I don't know who I am anymore, and I've got to try and build that. So
perhaps there's never been a metric in a sense of knowing who you are. It's just retaining that relationship at all costs. And that's where, again, we can all find, potentially not all of us, fingers crossed, but many of us can find ourselves in, toxic relationships, dysfunctional relationships, whatever you want to call it, because the first metric is to preserve, and Nicki said the word protect, which I thought was quite revealing, at all costs. And, there's nothing wrong with, clearly valuing relationship, connection, etc. Great, meaningful. But I think that language there of protecting it is very revealing. So look, I mean, what I would love to see Nicki do, I'm mindful of time here, Greg, is first of all, identify what those so-called self-sabotaging behaviors are. Now, we've focused predominantly on the behaviors in the relationship today, stemming from the trauma. She's mentioned the health stuff, and we obviously haven't got time to get into that today, but this will work for this set of questions will work for both the relationship and the health, but I'll focus on the relationship for the purpose of today, okay? So it would be looking at, what are those so-called self-sabotaging behaviors, okay? I say so-called again just to emphasize that, is it sabotaging or is it actually offering you a benefit? Short-sighted benefit, a benefit that doesn't match your values or what you'd love to create, but a benefit nonetheless. So what are those behaviors that you perceive aren't serving you or you'd love to change? And then looking at really building a list of what are the benefits you're getting out of those behaviors. And we've touched on this before, and this might sound quite paradoxical. It almost sounds like you're trying to incentivize those behaviors. But arguably, Nicki or many of us are caught up in those behaviors or bad habits either way. So they're already incentivized. The neural wiring is already that these behaviors are associated as advantageous or more positive than negative, because again, the truth is you would not do them if it didn't serve a purpose. Okay.
And would you say you can say this is what I might get out of these behaviors, and also this is what I might avoid? Like I don't have to.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would. No, I'll leave it at that. Yes. So basically, what benefits are you getting out of that? And that can be from both a seek and avoid perspective.
Okay.
So, for example, Nicki, I'm not saying you're doing this if that is the case, but it's a good example. So let's say there's an individual and they are checking their partner's phone because he was looking at his phone. He's probably looking at a meme like me, smiling, and they jump to who could be messaging him? Is it a colleague at work, whatever it is? And so let's say there's this impulse to check the messages or ask follow up questions. Hey, what's and almost like I said, have a bit of an insecurity or overthinking there, let's say. So you'd say, well, what are the benefits of that behavior? Now, or that asking. And the initial response might be, there's none, gets my husband angry, I feel worse at the end of it, right? That's the surface level answer. The real benefits might be, I get temporary relief. I rule out that there's another woman in that moment. I find out where he stands on a particular thing. He gets angry, but in that anger, he affirms to me that I'm being silly, and that is not the case, right? And so even if there's a conflict or a pain point, there still might be a short-sighted pleasure that he said, you're being ridiculous, there's no one else. So there's a pain, but there's still a short-sighted pleasure or relief you're getting out of it. So what are the so-called self-sabotaging behaviors? What are the benefits that you are getting out of them? And I would make the bigger you can build this list, the better, to the point where you can go to where you can almost laugh at yourself and you can go, God, no wonder I'm doing it.
Yeah, right.
No wonder I'm doing it. It makes sense, right? Same with smoking or any form of addiction, right? You wouldn't smoke if it wasn't offering you relief. Maybe you get maybe it incentivizes you to take your lunch break, whatever it is, right? For the smoko break, have you? So identify what specifically are the benefits to the behavior. Huge. And then now contrasting that to what are the drawbacks to this behavior, okay? Now this one, frankly, is an easier one. I would say that Nicki will be aware of this already, but recognizing the cost to the patterns you're in and wanting to change is nowhere near as powerful to associating it with the underlying motives. So what's the benefit I'm getting out of this? What does it truly represent? And then actually, how is that actually an ineffective way to get what I value, what I want?
Right. So is the goal with that once you're becoming conscious of how it's serving you and then also how it's not serving you, that you then make a decision that is not what you want? I mean, what do you do with that information to then not be looping so much with the self-sabotage?
Well, you're really changing the advantage to disadvantage ratio there, which sounds overly simple, but that is truly how humans operate, right? Every decision that we take is what we perceive as more advantages over disadvantages to what we value most, to our values or what I call purpose priorities.
Sorry to jump in for a second, but you've just said to make a list of advantages. So isn't that...
Sure. So let me say that. So they're self-sabotaging because they believe those behaviors are a short-sighted way to get their values met, right? But with them being so short-sighted and so protective, they are not having the ideal outcome. So we need to understand what the strategy represents, but then you could say rewire by looking at what is the drawbacks of those strategies.
Would it be that the drawbacks need to be stronger than the benefits?
That's correct.
Okay,
yes.
So when you're doing this list, it's important that, you need to spend more time associating the drawbacks that you don't want this, and do you need to build a focus on what's the alternative? What do I want?
Look, I wasn't going to overload listeners too much, but absolutely, what would be a more viable alternative, and then the benefits to the more viable alternative, absolutely. So benefits of the strategy, disadvantages of the strategy, and then a more viable alternative, right? We haven't even touched on the values piece today, Greg, and for the purpose of time, or maybe not harping on about it every episode, I won't, but I would really encourage Nicki, we did that value series only a couple of episodes back. Big resource there, a bit to work through, but, I can see that she's serious about, where does she start? So I would love her to peel back the layers and get clear on what she values. You said there, do you need more drawbacks or more of the disadvantages versus more of the positives? I said yes because there's truth in that, but really it's that the the drawbacks need to be more of a cost to your values, if that makes sense. So they need to be more meaningful. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we've said before that there's two levels of human motivation. There's pain driven or pain pleasure driven, seek and avoid, or there's purpose driven and values driven. And that
I think Nicki touched on that as well when she said that I'm worried that, paraphrasing, but I'm worried that I won't live up to my full potential. Like I'm on track to not be doing that over the, if I look forward, if she said, I want to change this because if I keep repeating these, I know I won't, insert all the good list of things, but there's I won't become the person. It's a long-term goal of who she wants to become and long-term values it sounds like she's tapping into. It's this kind of, I've done this as well. I think I'm on path for short-term pleasure, long-term regret, short-term comfort, long-term, like I'll look back at my life and go, oh, I missed it.
Yeah.
So you're saying the new strategy should be tied to your longer term values
because the values are more meaningful. They have more weight to it than just making sure that one list is bigger than the other of pains or pleasures, if that makes sense. Yeah. So Greg, breakthrough sort of segment, rounding things off, breakthrough insights, please. We're at, we joked before, right, we're going to keep it to 30 minutes today. That's on me. Apology.
It's great.
We're at 40.
All good stuff though.
It is what it is. I want a couple of minutes, please, on your practical takeaways or breakthrough moment of your own.
Yeah, I think it's a re-reminder that the things that we're looping on, the things that we're frustrated by, even Nicki being able to say, like, I'm conscious of, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, this is what's going on. That list creation is just something that is so important to make conscious by writing those things out and doing that. I think I've had a previous episode where that was also my breakthrough moment, which was just realizing again that the things that are negative in our life that we don't want, that there is some benefit to it, but it's still something that I haven't sat down and written down. So I think it's remembering the importance of carving out the time, whether it's, for me, it would be going, okay, book a coffee date with yourself and a journal, allocate an hour. This really matters. And doing that because I'm aware of repeating patterns for myself, and I'm sure the listeners will too. I'm conscious of them. But I think that I will overcome them by just trying harder in the direction of what I do want when I know that hasn't worked. The self-sabotage is that you know what you want, but there's something that keeps nipping at your heels. Yeah. And so
what are you getting out of it?
Yeah. There's something, I'm still getting that benefit. So essentially I need to be disillusioned with the benefit I was receiving from it to a degree that I've got a new plan that's values aligned. So that's what stood out to me is that piece of work is you have to do the work. There's no way around skipping that. And so, it's important, I'm sure, for me and the listeners as well. If you've got the things you deal with a lot, self-sabotage, procrastination, people-pleasing, all of that, make the list. Make the list, make the change.
Absolutely. And further to that, I've probably given you everything I've got today, Greg. My only wisdom per se would be just recognizing that every action that we do, particularly the self-sabotage and the trauma responses, I think that's been the theme here, serves us. Now, again, it's serving us in a short-term protective position, but if we just judge it and we say, this is bad, I need to get rid of this behavior, it's not serving me, it's not the truth, right? So we need to dig deep, whether it's, the list is always my recommendation. It is so much more profound and insightful to do that. But fundamentally knowing that everything we do serves us on some level. Is it serving us for our values or is it simply serving us in a short-term pain avoidance strategy? Becoming conscious of how it's serving us so then we can then start to contrast that to our values and how it conflicts there. All right. Well, thank you, Nicki, for submitting today's question. Really valuable question for listeners. If you haven't already, please hit that like button. It will help us grow the show more. And if you'd love to have your question answered, please submit an audio note. We'd love that. Breakthroughpod.com. Until next time. Thanks.